you take quick pictures? You got it.
Yeah, so my son Henry's 8, and he says 8 is where it's at. So
Keep it going. Awesome. Okay, quick picture. Here we go.
All right, guys. 1, 2, 3, smile. Awesome, you got it.
Thank you. We're going to meet Rick Clemens upstairs. We're going to go talk to the folks outside first.
Okay.
There. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it. Thanks for being out here.
Beto.
Hey, thank you for being here. Hey, good to see you. Hi. Hi there. Thanks for being here.
We sent a check to you for your Senate campaign.
Thank you very much. Very grateful. It worked almost.
That's right.
Thank you.
I don't think we got it.
Hi,
Welcome
thanks
to
for
North
having us.
Carolina.
Hey, thanks for letting us come here today. Appreciate it. Hey. Real quick. Yo.
Can I take us home?
For those who came out to welcome us, thank you. It's great to be in this community. For those who were innocently enjoying the beer when we showed up, it's great to be in your community. I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. Every one of you, no me importa if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, or if you cannot vote because of a prior conviction or your immigration status, as long as you are in this country, one of my fellow Americans, I will listen to you, learn from you, and serve you every single day of my life. Challenges before us are the greatest of our lifetimes.
25th.
Millions who cannot see a doctor or afford their prescriptions or be well enough to live to their full potential. More than 1 million young people who live in constant fear of deportation back to a country whose language they do not speak, where they no longer have family, when they are just as American as anyone else in this country. An economy that works too well for too few and not at all for too many. Americans working 2 and 3 jobs when 1 job should be enough. And when we pay everyone a living wage for the work that they perform, it will be. Division and fear used to keep us apart, to make us angry or afraid of one another or even ourselves, based on our differences of race or ethnicity or faith, or the number of generations you can count yourself an American, whether you just got here yesterday. We cannot allow those differences to divide us or to define us. Instead, we must be known as the people who came together despite those differences, respecting those differences, embracing those differences to live up to the full potential and promise of this country. So whether it's healthcare or immigration, or standing up to the challenge of climate change before it is too late, I want all of us to do it together. Not to only half the country. So we are grateful to be with you here today. We're going to go inside and greet those who are ready to see us. We're going to answer their questions. Oh, it's inside, can you hear us again? But I want to make sure, because we came up to listen, to learn. Cynthia's going to make sure that if you have a question for us, that we do our best to take questions from those who are out here now. So we'll bring Kano this microphone back out. I want to learn from you, listen to you, hear your perspective, those solutions that you bring to bear on the challenges that we face right now. Greensboro, thank you for having us out. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.
A very proud state representative that represents North and Northeast Greensboro, and we are excited to welcome Beto to the greatest city in North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina. In Greensboro, we know just what is at stake in this election. We know how one angry state legislature can take away the power of thousands of people in our community. But we also know how to roll up our sleeves and fight back for the democracy that we deserve here in our state. And guess who else knows how to do that work? Beto O'Rourke was on El Paso City Council, where he worked to support transportation, to invest in our neighborhoods. He worked in El Paso to ensure same-sex partners can access health care that worked for this city. And he held a town hall every week because he believes in the power of people's voices. Beto O'Rourke then served in Congress, where he worked in investing in health care, supporting our veterans. And he did all of it by knocking thousands of doors himself, which I know many of people here have done here in North Carolina. He then ran for Senate, where he went to 254 counties in the state of Texas. He raised record-breaking money without taking a single dollar from PACs, and increased voter turnout 500%. So I am excited that we have all these great Democratic candidates, because our democracy is better when we have more voices at the table. With that said, today we get to welcome one of the most passionate and committed people running, Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you for hosting us, having us out here today, for keeping the beer poured, keeping people refreshed. Drink that beer responsibly, but enjoy it. And thank you for taking some time out of your life and out of your day, sometimes away from your families. Those of you who traveled all the way from El Paso to be here, and I see you in the back with the El Paso shirt on, Houston and some other Texas cities, thank you. This is our first visit to Greensboro, and what an honor! What an honor to be welcomed by Representative Clemens and her 7-year-old daughter, Letty, who's a reminder of my 12-year-old son, Ulysses, my 10-year-old daughter, Molly, our 8-year-old, just a year older than Letty, Henry, all of whom I miss terribly, but for each of whom we're running this race, making sure that their future, whether it is a future defined by their opportunity to participate in this economy, the ability to work with their fellow El Pasoans, their fellow Texans, their fellow Americans, who may not have the same immigration status that they do now, but if we band together, they will, dreamers made U.S. citizens, able to contribute to their full potential to the success of this country. I want those kids of mine to look back on us, the people of 2019, to their folks, Amy and myself, and be proud that we ensured that for every challenge, we came up with a solution. Not from the Democratic Party, not from one man or one woman, but all of this country coming together, ensuring that the greatest challenges that we have ever faced are not met by half measure or by only half the country. Cannot be urban communities versus rural communities. Cannot be Democrats versus Republicans. It can't be those who've been here for 10 generations versus those who've been here for 10 days. It's got to be all of us coming together as a country, the full measure of the United States. Not denigrating or demeaning or vilifying or putting each other down. but expecting the absolute best from each and every single one of us, knowing full well that we all want the responsibility and the accountability that comes with it for delivering at this defining moment of truth for our country. And so, whether it is immigration, whether it is healthcare, ensuring that we have guaranteed, high quality, universal care for every American, meaning that in a country where there are millions who cannot see a doctor or afford their prescription medication, where we have too many dying of diabetes and the flu and curable cancers, in the year 2019, in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, in the whole of human history, that does not lack for resources, but does for political will thus far, that we're going to ensure that every single one of us can see that primary care provider afford our medications in a country where one of the largest providers of mental health care services right now is the county jail system. To the point that our fellow Americans, our fellow human beings with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, clinical depression, are so often getting arrested on purpose, throwing a chair through a window so they can get taken to the county jail where they will be provided a meal, a roof over their heads, a shirt on their back, a prescription to the psychotropic medication that will make life bearable for them, if only temporarily, while we lose out on the opportunity cost, the potential of what they would have done in their life if only they had been well enough. We lose out on the $100 or $120 a night that it takes to keep someone locked up because they have nowhere else to go in a country that imprisons more of its own than any other in the world per capita right now. For a fraction of that cost, we can ensure that universal health care also meant mental health care for everyone. And in this country that is in the midst of a crisis of maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for women of color, we also have to make sure that universal care means every woman makes her own decisions about her own body. We are up to that challenge. And again, it is not Democrats who are up to that challenge. I have yet to meet a Republican or an independent who thinks that it's all right for people to be dying of diabetes when insulin was invented nearly 100 years ago by scientists who sold it to the University of Toronto for $3 Canadian. With no prospect of profit or hope of royalties, they knew it was going to save lives, and that's why they shared it willingly. And yet right now, insulin is out of reach in so many cases for nurses who are providing care, administering insulin to their patients, and cannot afford it for themselves. I want to make sure that when my kids look back on us, when your kids look back on you, they will know what we know right now, what I just shared, and they will also know how we met that challenge. And that when people criticize and say, you know what, universal health care is an expensive proposition, maybe measured in absolute terms, it's a lot of money, but it's a hell of a lot less than what we are spending right now as we fail to take care of one another in this country. When we talk about an economy that works for everyone, in a country where so many are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, they may be the parents of those kids who on the first day of kindergarten, in some cases, are 10 months back in reading comprehension at 5 years old, 12 months back in math. Those parents do not have the time or the luxury to read to their child before the first day of kindergarten, or at all, because they're on the second shift or the third job, to pay the note on the mortgage, to pay back that student loan debt, to afford those prescriptions for their kids that might otherwise be out of reach right now. One job should be enough. If you're willing to work full-time, invest your future, your fate, your genius in your employer, in the betterment of this economy, this community, this country, I want to make sure that you're paid a living wage. I want to make sure that we give you time off to take care of our kids, family needs. I want to make sure that in the workplace, you are not discriminated against because you're a woman who still today in the year 2019 are paid less, in some cases a fraction of what a man makes in the same job for providing the same value in the same number of hours. I want to make sure that it is not legal to fire you for being gay, to refuse to hire you for your sexual orientation. You, North Carolina, have shown us the way that we do not have to demonize or vilify each other. We don't have to freak parents out about transgender kids using the bathroom at school for political gain, because we know that transgender kids are more likely to be the victims than the perpetrators of those attacks. And you know, by correcting this injustice in your own state, not only do we bring back the NCAA, not only do we bring back investment, we are bringing back talent, human capital that would have gone elsewhere, that was going to other places, that now sees hope and promise and a future in this state. North Carolina, you have shown those of us in Texas, which debated a bathroom bill based on yours, that has one of the worst levels of voter participation, which has an outflow of talent that does not feel welcomed in our state. You've shown us the way forward, that it's not easy, that you are not there yet, but by banding together, believing in each other, not allowing the differences to define us, we can make progress and we can do better. And we can never accept, ever accept, that we are there. As I was learning about the story of the Greensboro Four at the Woolworths counter in 1960, you think about that, almost 60 years ago. And you think about their ability to shock the conscience of this country, to force the conversation on integration and human rights, as well as civil rights. And some of us, perhaps those who look like me, would love to leave the conversation there. We've achieved what we were supposed to do. These are the victories that we can celebrate on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we can go on about our business. But in a community that boasts A&T, one of the proudest, one of the greatest, and the largest historically black colleges in the country, that is divided in two different congressional districts, both Republicans, who do not reflect the interests of the student body there. You understand that the gerrymandering, and let's call it what it is in Texas and North Carolina, so often based on race and ethnicity, trying to keep people apart and divided, shows us that almost 60 years after the Greensboro Four, we still have our work cut out for us. There's still 10 times the wealth in white America today than there is in black America today. The disparity between white infant mortality and black infant mortality is greater now in 2019 than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. That criminal justice system that I talked about earlier, the largest on the face of the planet, disproportionately comprised of people of color, so many arrested for nonviolent drug crimes, including possession of marijuana, which has been decriminalized or medicinalized or legalized in most states in this country. And we know that white people, black people, and people from all different walks of life and races and ethnicities use marijuana at the same rate. But only some are more likely than others to be frisked, to be patted down, to be arrested, to serve time, to upon release from jail, be forced to check a box on every single employment application form going forward, saying that they have a conviction, making it less likely that they get the job. Only some now will not qualify for a federally backed student loan to pursue their higher education, their potential, their ability to contribute to our continued greatness as a country. Only some communities have been criminalized and suppressed and kept down, and we've got to acknowledge that. As hard a truth as it is for some of us to swallow, that is reality for so many in so many different parts of the country today. So how do we meet this? We meet these challenges by ensuring that it's one person, one vote in this country. We end gerrymandering in the United States of America. We get big money out of our politics, no PACs, no super PACs, no corporations, no lobbyists. All human beings who care about themselves and their families, the only ones at the table in the conversation, in the voting booth. Same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration. You turn 18, I want you registered to vote. I want to hear your voice, see your vote in this democracy. And then when it comes to a criminal justice system that is patently unjust, let's make sure that we not only end the federal prohibition on marijuana, let's make sure that we not only expunge the arrest records of everyone caught for possession of a substance that's legal in this country. Let's also ensure that there's no profit motive to keep people locked up and for-profit prisons in this country. And then let's do this. Much harder work, much longer conversation, no easy answers to this. Let's confront the continuing legacy of slavery, of segregation, of Jim Crow, and of suppression in our economic life, in our criminal justice system, in healthcare, where we see those disparities not just in infant mortality, not just in maternal mortality, but across the board in communities of color. In everything that matters, we have two Americas right now functioning. We need to make sure that we come together as one America, not just because we've got to live the words of our foundational document that we were all created equal to equal opportunity, not just so that we can be honest to our kids about what this country stands for, the idea that we represent, that it's a nation defined not by race or ethnicity, as so many others are around the world, but by an idea and an experiment that has yet to reach its full potential or promise. But because when we do, when every single one of us can contribute to our full potential, this country as a whole does better. There's more economic growth, there are more jobs, there's more participation in our democracy, more talent on display in our state legislature and in the halls of Congress. This country will be firing on all cylinders as soon as every single one of us has a chance to fully participate. And when we think about the greatest challenge of them all, we're going to need every single one of us. The scientists, if we will still listen to them.
Yes.
And for all of you who in 2017 and 2018, 300 years after the Enlightenment, marched for science, thank you. You wouldn't think that we would have to do that in this country, but you did, and we are grateful. Because we have a president today who rejects science. So, the scientists tell us that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius over pre-industrial revolution levels just since 1980. I was 8 years old in 1980, so this happened during my lifetime, the lifetime of many people here in this room. And that 1 degree warming, which also warmed the oceans, produced some of the storms that we are seeing here in North Carolina. Matthew and then Florence, 2 500-year floods produced within 2 years of each other. You should be good for 1,000 years, but you're not. Because the scientists say these storms will become more frequent, more devastating, more deadly. In other words, they're going to take more human lives. Like the storms that we see in Texas, 58 inches of rain. It's the landfall record. Fell from the sky in 2017 in Houston, Texas. Flooded people out of their homes for the 3rd time in 5 years. We've had 3 500-year floods in that period of time. Folks had not finished rebuilding from the last one before their homes were destroyed again, before the lives of those in their lives were lost. And this was not visited on us by God or by nature. It was our own emissions, our own excesses, and our own inaction in the face of the facts and the science. But those scientists say that we have 10 years left in which to get this right. If we warm 1 more degree Celsius, there are kids here, so I'm going to use the polite version of this. It is going to be a really bad future for them and for their kids and for the generations who will succeed them. 400,000 apprehensions at our southern border last year, and you know full well, a lot of them were kids. They were lucky kids with their moms, leaving some of the most violent countries on the planet. Countries now with the added problem of historic drought. They can no longer farm and grow their own food. They are desperate. They're doing exactly what you would do if faced with the same conditions. If the only way to save your daughter's life, to feed your child, was to come to this country, you would as well. And that's probably what my ancestors, the O'Rourkes, did in the 19th century, fleeing famine and Ireland. But if you think 400,000 apprehensions on the border is a problem, imagine what it's going to be like when some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life. And that's the trajectory that we are on today. The competition for resources, the droughts, the floods, the fires, all at historic levels right now, will become exponentially worse. We were talking to the mayor of Charleston, another city hit by Florence. And he said that that storm was 50 miles wider than it would have typically been because of the warming of the oceans, dumped twice as much water as the average historic storm would there in South Carolina, here in North Carolina. This is happening right now. The farmer that I met in Texas on the campaign trail, who said, look, I don't come to this kind of thing, one, because I'm a Republican, two, because we're missing my son's basketball game. But I'm here because what my grandparents planted and grew, what my parents planted and grew, we are planting on our farm, and it is not growing anymore. She told me climate change is here. It is happening right now, and I want to know what we are going to do about it. So, if we come together, all of us, to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, to invest in renewable energy, to acknowledge that the jobs are following our conscience. The two fastest growing occupations in the United States today are solar jobs and wind jobs. If we bring farmers into the mix, and through the Farm Bill, incentivize them to plant cover crops, to soak up more of this carbon out of the atmosphere, to use new technologies like precision tilling to disturb less of the carbon that's already in the ground. In other words, if all of us do everything we can, and if we are able to take our rightful role on the world stage and convene the other powers of this planet to do their part, then maybe, just maybe, we can forestall the worst of the disaster that awaits our kids. But this is our moment of truth, and we cannot be found wanting. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States. So grateful that you're here. Looking forward to answering the questions, hearing your comments, listening to your suggestions. Cynthia Connell from my team, who's right here, has got a microphone. If you raise your hand, she'll bring it to you. Greensboro, thanks for having us out. Yes, sir.
Well, Beto, my name's Dominic. I'm a student. I'm here today on my birthday. And
Happy birthday, Dominic!
So, my question was sort of a two-parter. The first one is more important, which is where do the blue shirts come from?
Yes.
And then the second part was, as I hope you know, here in North Carolina, we've really done our teachers a disservice here. We've really done our students a disservice with our education. And you know, our Republican-led General Assembly cut a lot of the teacher raises that Governor Cooper was gonna try to give because they have to pay for their own classroom supplies here. And I'm just going to start in college this fall as a freshman. I took a year off to work in the congressional race, and I wanted to ask, what can you do at a federal level to guarantee high-quality education for everyone, no matter what state they're in, from like pre-K all the way through college?
Yeah, great question. First of all, happy birthday. Thanks for spending it with us. So I called your governor, Governor Cooper, before I came to town, before I came to the state, and I asked him what was important to him and the people that he represents and serves. Without skipping a beat, first thing he said is, we've got to expand Medicaid to ensure that everyone is well enough to go to school, to teach school. Those who earn too much right now to afford to be able or to enroll into Medicaid, but do not earn enough to afford private insurance, they are out of luck. In Texas, same situation. Inexplicable. Federal government was offering 100 cents on the dollar for expansion, and we refused the deal. Met a young woman in Waco, Texas, 3 kids, told me that she's refusing the promotion at work because it will price her kids out of Medicaid. So she said, my promotion will be their demotion. I can no longer afford to take care of them. What a drag on her advancement, on this economy, on growth, on her potential. Expanding Medicaid, she is free to do what she was put on this planet to do. Right now, we are holding her back. Second thing he said, we've got to pay our teachers a living wage. No reason that any educator in North Carolina should be working a second job. They've got the most important job in front of them. Now, whether you're a nurse, a counselor, a librarian, work in the cafeteria, pick up as a custodian at the end of the day, drive those kids to school as a school bus driver, or are the instructor at the front of the classroom, I want those public school educators focused on those children, unlocking their lifelong love of learning, after which there's no stopping those kids. There's no stopping us as a country. But right now, if you think about it, we're graduating people from college, sometimes with master's degrees, with tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars on their back. Cumulatively in this country, $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, with a default rate of about 10%. In other words, we are crushing people into the ground. They cannot pay this back. They cannot afford to be school teachers, to put food on the table, pay the note on the mortgage, and pay back that student loan debt that they have accrued. So in addition, además, to paying them more for their work in public education, if they're willing to commit their lives to public service, let's wipe clear and clean their debt so they can focus on that classroom and those kids. Acknowledging that in the first grade and in kindergarten you have kids who are 10 and 12 months back in reading and in math. Let's start education universally at pre-K at 3 or 4 years old for every kid. Let's make the investment in our future. And then knowing that in that kindergarten classroom, if you're a child of color, you stand 5 times the likelihood of being disciplined or suspended or expelled. Let's also make sure that we recruit and retain more teachers who look like the students in front of them. I think that's a great challenge that we can meet as well. If we do that, if we invest in the next step, free community college, debt-free higher education, we're going to make sure that cost is not a barrier or an object to everyone being able to give back to their maximum capacity. That's what I want to make sure we do. Thank you. Going to the microphone right here.
These 2 questions are from folks that were waiting outside.
Okay, thanks for coming in.
Hi.
Hey.
As a former teacher who quit in complete exasperation, I have an idea. I work here in Greensboro at the Office of Disability Adjudication and Review. I know a way to get a bunch of people jobs. Classroom monitors. You can be disabled. You can just sit in the class. You don't have to interrupt the teacher. You don't have to say a word. Let's get another adult in the classroom to keep it together with the discipline. That's why I quit. I couldn't hack it.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for saying that. I'll tell you what, the solutions to the challenges that we face in our public school education system are going to be met with the solutions that come from teachers and educators.
Mr. Boss is a lunatic.
Well, I might put it differently, but we've got our work cut out for us. Yeah, let's be respectful to everyone, but I want to answer the spirit of your question. In El Paso, Texas, my 3 kids go to world-class public schools. 2 of them at Mesita Elementary, which is the same elementary school I went to. In my parents' generation, were you to speak Spanish in the halls of Mesita, you'd be suspended, or if you kept it up, expelled. In my generation, you had 45 minutes every other day, maybe every day of the week. You were in school in Spanish. My kids today are going to learn their math in Spanish. Tomorrow they're going to learn their math in English. They have true all-day dual language education, making the most of the largest Spanish community in the hemisphere. Those are innovations from public school educators, bringing those ideas to the fore and changing for the better the quality of public school education in El Paso. So I want to make sure that we take your idea into consideration as well. Thank you for offering it.
Take the yacht away.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
this is our second question that was outside.
Hi, Beto.
Hey.
You touched on mental health a little bit earlier. A little more specific, something that's been neglected for a long time is the opioid addiction, which has affected so many communities in this country.
Absolutely.
It has affected my family severely personally. I wanted to see if you had anything specific as far as plans go, going forward to combat that disease.
Absolutely. Thank you for raising this question about opioids. Every single month, as a member of Congress for 6 years, I held a town hall. I served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Our community of El Paso was distinguished by service to country, so a lot of veterans would come to that town hall. They'd tell me how the VA was doing. I learned to trust their feedback, not ask the VA how the VA is doing, ask veterans how the VA is doing. This gentleman comes to the microphone and says, I came back from serving my country, put my life on the line, was prescribed an opioid, to which I became addicted. The VA cut me off without any other replacement medication or therapy or alternative. And he said, I'm here to tell you, and he said it on the microphone in front of everybody else, that I'm buying heroin on the street right now because it's the only way that I can take care of myself. In fact, when we look back from those who are dying from opioid overdoses, those who are suffering from opioid addiction, in the vast majority of cases, their journey began with a legally prescribed opioid, just like that veteran. And that veteran and others might wonder, why can't you prescribe me medicinal cannabis, which doctors at the VA want to be able to do, to which you will not become addicted? But if you take it now, you're a criminal in the eyes of the law here in South Carolina, in my home state of Texas. So, you know what I meant, North Carolina. Just making sure you guys are listening and you are.
It's a hard job campaigning.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
In North Carolina.
In North Carolina. So, here are my thoughts. One, this didn't just happen. There were pharmaceutical corporations, executives at them, who marketed these opioids to prescribers and by extension to our fellow Americans. They are in part responsible for the nearly 70,000 drug overdose deaths just last year. Not a single one of them has spent a single night in a single jail or paid any meaningful fine or consequence of any significance. So holding those who are responsible for the crisis that we're in is step one. Step two, let's make sure that if you are addicted to an opioid, we don't treat this as a criminal justice issue. You do not belong in jail. You belong in long-term treatment, therapy. Want to get you back on your feet, again, living to your full potential. It requires an investment, but by all means, let's make that investment going forward. And then let's look at those populations, whether it is veterans who are coming back from battle, who sometimes are falling through the cracks, don't get connected to that post-9/11 GI Bill benefit that they earned, the health care that they need, that job or career that will ensure the purpose and function that might otherwise be missing from their lives after service to this country. Let's go to rural communities, which far too often we have ignored, left behind, forgotten, or at best take pity on and sympathize with, instead of partnering with and ensuring that we make the investments in infrastructure, in job opportunities, and in education. In other words, let's understand why so many people are being consumed by diseases of despair in the United States of America. So I want to make sure that there's accountability, there's responsibility, there are alternative treatments, including medical marijuana, which can save so many lives that we are otherwise losing right now, and that there's treatment for those in the grips of addiction. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
To your right.
To my right.
Right here.
There you go.
How you doing, Congressman O'Rourke?
Doing well. Thank you for being here.
I just wanted to ask you, I'm a Wake Forest student. I'm a sophomore at Wake Forest University. I'm also a United States Army cadet. And I wanted to ask you, because I know you talked a lot about domestic policy, but I wanted to see what your foreign policy would be towards not just our allies, but Russia, and most importantly, with tensions growing in the Ukraine, how do you intend to deal with that on the foreign policy level?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Thank you for your commitment to serving our country. This is a great opportunity for the United States, for the next administration. Because where we are right now, when you look at our foreign policy, is one of the most desperate moments of our history. We have a president who has chosen dictators, and strongmen, describes himself as having fallen in love with Kim Jong-un, a murderous dictator in North Korea who has the blood of American citizens on his hands, including Otto Warmbier, who threatens our allies, our 30,000 service members stationed in and around Seoul in South Korea, and the continental United States with nuclear weapons that, despite this love affair, have not been diminished in number nor in the capacity to be delivered here or anywhere else around the world. Sides with Vladimir Putin. There's consensus in the intelligence community and across the aisle. He's responsible for attempting to undermine our elections in 2016, seeking to do so again in 2018, and will do so going forward until there's real cost and consequence for his interference and his actions. And yet on a stage in Helsinki, Finland, our president said he believed that man, not our intelligence community, not the United States, not us. He's turned his back on NATO, questioned an alliance of 29 countries. The only time the Mutual Defense Clause, Article 5, has been invoked was just once. When we were attacked on 9/11, 2001, every one of those countries had our back. Yet he wonders whether that makes sense anymore, inviting further aggression from Russia, not just in Georgia, not just in Crimea, not just in Ukraine, but everywhere around the world.
Trump is a traitor.
I want to make sure that we do everything we can to strengthen and bolster our alliances, some of them like NATO, forged in sacrifice and service, going back 80 years to the greatest threat we had then faced, Nazi Germany, not just to our country, but to the Western democracies, and the 75 years that followed the end of World War II, those women and men who served in Korea, in Vietnam, in the first Gulf War, doing everything they could to make this world safe for democracy, and they have, jeopardized now by this president. So not only must we restore those alliances and those friendships, not only must we renew our trading relationships, because these tariffs and trade wars around the world affect our farmers and manufacturers, our workers, and our economy. We are the ones bearing the brunt of these policies. We must also convene the countries of the planet as the indispensable nation around challenges of climate change, nuclear proliferation, or these wars that we have been fighting in some instances for 28 years. Since 1991, when I was a high school senior, and George H.W. Bush first announced that we were going to Iraq. And we've been there every year through each successive presidential administration since. There tonight, with no definition of victory, no strategy, no end in sight, no understanding of the cost and consequence. So far measured in thousands of lives and trillions of dollars. 18th year in Afghanistan and counting for a war that was declared in 2001 that became a blank check that underwrites not just our presence there, but in Syria, in Somalia, in Libya, in Yemen, just to name a few of the countries where we're at war tonight. U.S. service members' lives on the line, taking the lives of others in your name. So if we want to bring these wars to a conclusion, if we really want to honor your service and the service of those who have preceded you, we need to bring these wars to a close, bring these service members back home to our country, work with our allies, and in some cases our enemies, to bring about peaceful, nonviolent resolution to these crises. And lastly, it should not have come as a surprise to us that tens of thousands of kids showed up at our front door on the U.S.-Mexico border, leaving some of the deadliest places on the face of the planet today. We cannot meet them with a $30 billion, 30-foot-high, 2,000-mile wall. We cannot only meet them with our asylum laws, though we must, in the interim, we must meet that challenge with investment in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America, reducing violence there so those kids and their parents do not have to come here. That's a foreign policy opportunity as well. Thank you. Again.
All right, I'm over here. And I know there are so many hands up. Thank you guys. I'm going to do my very best to get to as many as I can.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Hi.
She's telling me to give you shorter answers, and I will. I will. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sam. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm a first-generation college graduate. I went back to school as a single parent of 3.
Woo!
I did all of the things I was supposed to do. I worked my butt off. I've got 3 kids that'll be starting college in the next 4 years. I still have $50,000 in loans. I have no way to help them. And I know you talked a little bit about education going forward, but what about that outstanding student debt that so many of us are buried under right now?
Yeah.
Great question, and thank you for sharing your story as a way to illustrate the challenge. We were in a small town in Texas during the Senate campaign, and I remember we were talking about healthcare, and I talked about Medicaid expansion, and the woman who had asked the question interrupted me. She said, you know what, hold it right there, Beto. Even if you expanded Medicaid, and I qualified, there's no one in this community that takes Medicaid or Medicare. Before she could finish, another gentleman stood up, and he said, actually, I'm a doctor, I take Medicaid and Medicare, and even if you don't have insurance, I'd be happy to help you. And I thought it was such a beautiful story. I took him aside at the end of the meeting, and I said, tell me why you're here in this community. And he said, I grew up here, went to high school here, went to college, could not afford medical school. But my hometown and the state of Texas kicked in for my medical school education on condition that I move back and take care of those who had ensured my success in the first place. And the deal was, he was only supposed to be back for 6 years, and then they were going to cut him loose. He was in his 8th year, had married his high school sweetheart, was raising 2 beautiful kids in his hometown, literally restoring vitality, life to that community that was otherwise losing it. So for you and for others, if you're willing to dedicate some part of your life and your career to some public service, now that could be in the classroom, it could be in a VA that is 45,000 clinical positions short right now, not unconnected to 20 veterans a day, every day, taking their own lives in this country. If you want to serve one of them, I want to wipe clean your student loan debt. If you want to move back to a community that needs the talent for an in-demand profession that is currently underserved, let's make sure that we invest in you. But at a minimum, if that's not an opportunity for you, let us refinance your existing student loan debt at a much lower rate so that it's affordable for you. And again, if that costs us a little bit more, so be it, because it's an investment in you that will pay a return with the freedom that you now have to pursue your full potential. So those would be our ideas to make sure that we help you out with existing student loan debt. Thank you.
We're back here by the bar.
Hi, Beto, I'm Chloe.
Hey, Chloe.
I'm a student at Elon University. I'm a future educator, and I actually recently just visited a juvenile justice system in South Carolina. And while I was there, obviously there's, when I was listening to their stories, there was a huge tendency and pattern amongst racial disparities and the school-to-prison pipeline, and I was just wondering how you wanted to address those, hopefully during your presidency.
Yeah. So first of all, just as you did, let's call out what is happening. That schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline doesn't begin in high school, it begins in kindergarten, where we set expectations for kids based on their differences in ethnicity and race, compounded by some kids not having the ability for a parent to read to them or to take care of them because they're working too many jobs all at the same time. So talk about an intersection of race, of economic challenges, of healthcare challenges sometimes. There was a program instituted by one of your former governors of North Carolina, Jim Hunt. This Smart Start program, where he wanted to make sure we were making investments in kids at 3, 4, 5 years old. And again, same principle applies. An investment up front is going to guarantee a massive return over the long haul. More likely to graduate from high school, attend college, earn more over the course of your life, stay out of the criminal justice system. So making the investment in schools, in teachers, in kids, in healthcare, but also confronting the fact that it's not just our criminal justice system. It's not just our system of healthcare. It's not just our system of education. Really, our country has gross disparities in opportunity and outcomes depending on race. And there are structural, institutionalized reasons for that. And until we talk about it, we are never going to change it. So thank you for making the effort to go visit some of those who are on the receiving end of this broken system, and for standing up for them and making sure that we get it right going forward. Thank you. Very grateful. Appreciate
it. Go Chuco.
My name is Lauren Kalo, and I'm actually the upcoming student body president for UNCG, and so limits the college student vote, and so right now we're trying to push for them to allow voter IDs to be like the college IDs to be a form of voter ID for this bill. And so basically, like, this is a two-part question, but.
So we're here on behalf of the UNCG student body, and we're advocating for student IDs to be valid voter IDs. And how can you address the issue of disenfranchisement in voter ID laws?
Right on. Great question. Thank you for your advocacy. Thanks for making a difference. Thanks for calling out something that, again, we'd love to celebrate the fact that the ballot box was integrated, that we passed the necessary amendments to ensure full citizenship for our fellow Americans, especially those who are the descendants of the Americans who built this country on their backs in bondage. But we're not there yet. My state, Texas, ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout before 2018, not because we love our democracy less than you do in North Carolina, but because we were drawn that way by our state legislature. Depending on your color or your ethnicity, you were drawn out of a congressional district, therefore out of a reason to vote because the power of your vote was diminished, therefore out of this American system of government. So you go back to the 1920s in Texas, an all-white Democratic primary, and in Texas, like South Carolina, the Democratic Party was government. There was no other alternative. And so we locked out African Americans for more than 20 years. The guy who fought, one of our fellow El Pasos, Dr. Lawrence Nixon, to integrate the ballot box, took his case to the Supreme Court twice. It was not until 1944, first took it in 1924, that he was allowed to vote. And yet in Texas, we still have a challenge of being able to access it, compounded by the fact that in Texas, you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box under our voter ID laws. But you cannot use your student ID at the University of Texas at El Paso to prove who you are at the ballot box. It's very clear who we want to vote and who we would rather not vote going forward. So the way to meet this challenge, which is the way that this country tried to do so after being galvanized by the Greensboro 4, the Friendship 9 in Rock Hill, South Carolina, others who were willing to take their lives into their hands and lose their lives in the fight for civil rights. What came of that ultimately was a Voting Rights Act signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Voting Rights Act that has been diminished in power, in scope, in strength by the Supreme Court that we have today. And so this country calls for a new Voting Rights Act that will not allow for voter ID laws that keep people out of the ballot box. A Voting Rights Act that will not allow for discrimination based on race or ethnicity or any other difference. And then we have to meet that not just by defending our gains, but by advancing even further. Same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration. So you turn 18, doesn't matter, you're registered to vote and ready to go. These are the kind of changes that we need. So we're going to be following your lead. Best of luck. It's right there. Thank you.
All right, right behind you by the bar. And again,
Always at the bar,
I
Colin.
know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, guys. I only have time for 2 more.
Thank you for coming, sir. This is a question about health care.
Yeah.
You spoke clearly about universal health care. My question is, what about the current private health care insurance companies that are so powerful? I'm old enough to remember how they completely blocked President Clinton's movement for universal health care when there was a wave of support for that, and yet the health insurance companies killed that. They are powerful players, and I'm curious what you're going to do about that, and if they stay as part of the picture, rather than be abolished effectively, how are we going to avoid having a two-tier healthcare system? Because the countries with which I'm familiar that have kept private healthcare as an option have universal healthcare, but end up de facto with healthcare for the poor and healthcare for the wealthy. Yeah. So A, how do you get past these companies to get universal healthcare in? And B, what do you then do with them afterwards?
Yeah, great question. You know, trying to explain the otherwise inexplicable. Why, given the fact that we buy prescription medications for Medicare beneficiaries, Medicaid beneficiaries, VA, military retirees, federal employees, why are prescription drug costs among, if not the highest on the planet? Why do we not use our leverage to drive down the cost? Why do we not allow you to purchase drugs from Canada, legal drugs, prescription drugs, or Mexico, or some other country? It is because we have members of Congress and entire institutions, like the House and the Senate, that are captured and corrupted by those who can buy access and outcomes. It's one of the reasons that I don't take a dime of PAC money from anybody, whether it's an insurance provider or anybody, because we don't want a conflict of interest, and we do not want the appearance of a conflict of interest. And it can also help explain the compromises that we saw in a great advancement, the Affordable Care Act, that ensured that millions more of our fellow Americans could be covered, could see a doctor, and yet it left the insurance companies with far too much control. The drug companies, including Purdue Pharma, who we talked about earlier with the opioid crisis, with far too much power. So here's the best path that I can think of going forward. Following your governor's lead, begin by expanding Medicaid in those states that have not. Bring down the cost of premiums, the size of deductibles, the expense of prescription medications. Use the full bargaining power of Medicare, or allow you to buy overseas if that is better for you and your family. If you choose to stay within employer-sponsored insurance, either as a small business owner or as an employee, because that works for your family and you like the network that you're in, so be it. We want you to be good. However, if you have no insurance, we will automatically enroll you in Medicare. And if you do not like the private insurance that you have right now, because you cannot afford it right now, because you don't have the money to pay the copay on your prescription, you can't bridge that deductible, then you too can enroll in Medicare. And if we invest, to answer your question, how we meet the challenge of a potential two-tiered system, if we invest in Medicare so that it becomes the provider or insurer of choice, then over time people will choose to migrate from employer-sponsored insurance plans. There's a name for this right now based on a bill introduced by Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, called Medicare for America. It is the surest, and I believe the quickest way for us to get to guaranteed high-quality universal health care. So thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Right here. There we go. And I'm very sorry, but this is going to be our last question.
Hola, soy Austin y te quería preguntar si qué es lo que podría hacer usted para la gente que ha estado de aquí más de una década, que no podía pedir ningún papel o documentos.
Sí.
What would you be able to do for people who have been here for more than a decade, who have not been able to get any legal documents or anything to be here legally, who have worked hard and everything?
Thank you. Good question. Sí. Voy a empezar en español y luego voy a hablar en inglés. Hay millones aquí adentro de este país que están trabajando en las profesiones más duros, haciendo el trabajo que la gente que han nacido aquí en los Estados Unidos no querían hacer. Hay más de 1 millón que se llama soñadores o dreamers. Como niños vinieron a este país y ya están contribuyendo al éxito que todos están disfrutando en este momento. Yo quiero que ellos puedan estar aquí, quedar en sus comunidades, sus hogares, con sus familias, como ciudadanos, para contribuir a su máximo potencia al futuro y al éxito de este país. Sus padres, que se llaman en inglés the original dreamers, también necesitan salir de la sombra para contribuir al éxito de sus comunidades, de la economía y de la democracia de este país. Hay millones que pueden contribuir más a que necesitamos a las soluciones de los retos que enfrentan cada americano, pero si no hacemos que es necesario después de 30 años de hablar sobre la reforma migratoria, no vamos a tener el éxito que merecemos como un país de migrantes. If we do not move forward on comprehensive immigration reform, after more than 30 years of talking about it, we're going to lose out on all the potential of millions of people. So many of them doing jobs, as you mentioned, here for more than a decade, that no one is going to do otherwise. So many of them dreamers, more than 1 million, who know no other country, for all intents and purposes, beyond this country, who are our teachers, who are serving in the United States military, who are perhaps working here or going to school. They're our fellow Americans by any measure that counts,
And this is a chance for us to move forward because Republicans and Democrats agree that deporting more than 1 million dreamers, or their parents, the original dreamers, is not only cost prohibitive, it would violate every tradition and value that makes this country great in the first place. So let's move forward. Legalizing the dreamers and their parents and bring millions more out of the shadows.